Well, welcome to the lesson recording for week 7 for Green Design and Technology. So I'll click on week 7, and you can see that week 7 goes May 13 through 19. So we're getting down to the end of the course. We have week 7, week 8, week 9, and then a couple of days in the last week. So we're getting down to the end. And as a reminder, start looking at getting makeup work in. You will not be able to revise anything submitted after May 31st. All work needs to be in by July 4th. But start looking now. Go back into the class, see what work you need to make up, and get that work submitted, please. Okay, this week we're going to look at green transportation. So, of course, you're watching this recording. You do the Class Connect write-up. And there are only 2 lessons in this for this week. And this week, the first lesson is all about green vehicles. What is a green vehicle? What are some fuels? What is a hybrid vehicle? And how can we conserve fuel in transportation? And the green transportation planning, so some ways people are designing transportation systems, identify different types of transportation, and look at population density. Then, of course, you'll have the study questions as always, the quiz study guide, the quiz, and the assignment for the section. So just like all of these all the sections in this course is broken down this way. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. So we're in section 4, which is week 7. And let's look at the Class Connect write-up first. And the lesson 1, what are the questions? So what are the 2 main problems with cars burning fossil fuel? What is the purpose of an emissions test? Choose one of the 6 alternative fuels, provide 2 benefits of that fuel source. And how do hybrid vehicles take advantage of regenerative braking? So that's all in lesson 1. All right, so here we are, section 4. All about green transportation, alternative fuels, alternative fuel sources, fuel conservation, green transportation planning, and types of public transportation. So that's all of section 4. But we're going to get right into now, of course, the first lesson. That's all about green vehicles. So when we think about green vehicles, first of all, there are 2 major problems with most motor vehicles. They burn fossil fuels, which is non-renewable, and they release greenhouse gases. So that's the 2 main problems with most motor vehicles these days. Now, if vehicles don't have these issues or just have one of them, then that can be considered a green vehicle. So there are a couple of different types of green vehicles. There's alternative fuels, so they burn something other than the standard gasoline that we get at gas stations, or they are low emissions, or a combination of both. So you can read all about alternative fuel vehicles. They run on different types. Sometimes you'll see some gas stations have what's called E85 fuel, and that's ethanol fuel, and that can only run in certain vehicles. And then low emissions, so this would be vehicles that are much more efficient, so their emissions are less. So the emissions, those are usually the pollutants that are released into the environment. So if you have less emissions, then that is considered a green vehicle. So you can see now your low emission vehicles have much fewer emissions. And some states require vehicles to go through emissions testing. Those of you that live in Denver, the city or county of Denver might require emissions testing on vehicle every year you register your vehicle. I lived in California at one time, and in California, every vehicle has to have the emissions checked when it gets sold, when it changes hands. In some counties in California, to register your car each year, you have to have emissions test. In New York, New Jersey, places like that, you have to do it. But emissions test, it analyzes the emissions. So to pass the emissions test, vehicle must not put out more pollutants than the legal limit. So that's what an emissions test is. It tests to see if your vehicle is legal to be on the road as far as emissions that it puts in the air. And if it's not, they make you fix it. And if it can't be fixed, then of course you have issues. You may not be able to drive it, or you have to go to Department of Motor Vehicles and get a permit to drive it for a little while or something. So there are really some things you need to be careful of as far as having vehicles that meet emission standards. And you'll often hear that on car advertisements. Our vehicle meets 2015 emission standards. So those are standards or requirements the country has put in, or states have. Now this talks all about different fuels. First one talks about ethanol, then biodiesel, hydrogen, natural gas, propane, electricity. So if you remember, that one Class Connect write-up question said, choose one of these sources, and don't just choose ethanol because it's the first one. Choose something you really want to learn about, and you'll go through and learn about it. So this is all about ethanol, and you can find a couple of benefits to ethanol. So you can see all about. In the United States, most vehicles run 10% ethanol, 90% gas. But then there's E85, as I talked about, so that's more ethanol. Certain cars can run on that. Biodiesel, of course, bio means earth, right? So this talks about biodiesel. Of course, diesel is a regular fuel that comes from fossil fuels, but then there are biodiesel, which is a different type of diesel, made a different way. Hydrogen, so running on hydrogen, that can be used in fuel cells. And vehicles run on fuel cells. Natural gas, of course, natural gas, it's a fossil fuel, but it burns clean. And we have lots of natural gas in the United States. In fact, we're thinking that the United States can be an exporter of natural gas, just like the Middle Eastern countries are exporters of oil. So that could be good for our economy. Propane. Propane, again, is a fossil fuel, but it burns clean and it's generally cheaper. Then finally, electricity. Electric vehicles, you've heard a lot about that. So anyway, you're going to choose one of these 6 and come up in the Class Connect write-up with 2 benefits of that fuel source. There's a little drag and drop activity, see if you can do that well. Then we get into hybrid vehicles. And hybrid vehicles, they run on more than one fuel or energy source. So the common is the hybrid electric, would mean it's half electric or runs on electric sometimes, and then runs on gasoline the rest of the time. The thing about hybrid is obviously they're low emissions because they don't burn gasoline all the time. However, the one thing about it is that to get the electricity that you use to charge up your hybrid, a power plant is burning coal probably to charge that up. So you need to think about that. Now here's the idea that's really interesting. Hybrid vehicles, regenerative braking. And this uses the heat energy when you hit your brakes in your car, the heat energy that's usually there, and actually stores that energy in the battery. So they're trying to make the electric cars where they will generate their own electricity and charge themselves. Wouldn't that be a great thing? Wouldn't it be cool if electric cars, if they had solar panels on the tops of them so that they could gather energy as they drive and they could charge their batteries? So there's some different things about hybrid vehicles. Practice that, see how well you can do. Fuel conservation, ways to conserve fuel, alternative fuel vehicle, we talked about some of those. Drive a vehicle even burns only gasoline, but make sure it gets like 30-35 miles a gallon. Maintain it well, keep your tires inflated so you get better gas mileage. Better gas mileage means you burn less fuel, fewer pollutants in the air. Don't drive too fast. If you drive over 60 for a long time, you're lower mileage, so then you're burning more fuel, more fumes go in the air, right? Don't idle the engine for very long. That's like when your parents go out on a cold winter day and they let the car warm up for 5 minutes. I knew somebody that did that. You only need to let the car warm up for about 30 seconds at the most on a really cold day. You can convert your vehicle. You can convert it to run on propane if you want to. Don't drive as much. Use public transportation, carpool, use human-powered transportation, right? Use a bicycle or walk, whatever. So those are just different alternatives to how we normally get around and how we can conserve fuel, put fewer emissions in the air. Try this practice, see what you know there. In the summer, we looked at alternative fuels and energy sources for vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and fuel conservation. We learned about all those things. Okay, let's go back to the write-up. 2 main problems with cars burning fossil fuels. I showed you that. Purpose of cars emission test, talked about that. Choose one of the 6 alternative fuels and give 2 benefits to that fuel. How do hybrid vehicles take advantage of regenerative braking? And I talked about that. Okay, now we're going into lesson 2. Example of green road building. How is public transportation more affordable in densely populated areas? So here we are in lesson 2. Now we're going to look at the environmental impact of public transportation. So transportation planning. It used to be that transportation planning was just where you're going to put roads. But now it's, where do people live? Where are the businesses? What roads are going to connect? What is it going to do for the public health? Is it environmentally sustainable? So if you're thinking about a career as an engineer, environmental engineering is huge. Civil engineering, which is where you build bridges and roads and things, those are huge because we're really concerned about planning our transportation grid. So designing for public transportation, so you can see some of the different things. High occupancy lanes, meaning they have to have 2 or more people in the vehicle, then you can use the lanes that usually go faster than the regular lanes. Those are called HOV lanes, high occupancy vehicles. So you'll see those around Denver and lots of places. Greener road materials. So most roads are made from oil-based product, that's asphalt. But now they can make roads that can be used from recycled materials to make roads. So that's one of the great ways, and it lets the precipitation of the water seep through naturally. So those are a couple ways that greener roads are being built. Designed for human-powered transportation, put more sidewalks to encourage people to ride their bicycles or walk or skateboard, whatever it is. Greener neighborhoods, putting sidewalks, paths, things like that. Maybe make it to where there are neighborhoods closer to where people work. So there are different things like that that can really help. So practice, go through this, see what you know. Public transportation. Public transportation, of course, is transportation that is used by many people at the same time. Also sometimes called mass transit or public transit. In bigger cities, Denver, Fort Collins, and things like that, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, you have buses. In Denver, of course, you have the light rail. So those are all forms of public transportation. You can see down here buses, trains, ferries, airplanes, etc. Carpools and taxis aren't really public transportation because it's not a bunch of strangers riding together. So different types. There's buses, transportation, trains, and of course the thing about buses, lots of buses run on alternative fuels, which is great. Trains, we don't, well actually you have light rail in Denver, right? Also on the East Coast, there's train connecting Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. to New York, and people use the trains all the time. Ferries, of course, are big ships or boats that go across waterways, that go across rivers or across bays and lakes. And finally, of course, airplanes. We know what airplanes are and how they relate to public transportation. So answer these questions, see what you know. So for planning public transportation, so you can see this is a public transportation planning network, and you can see the different types of roads, the different destinations. I assume all these circles are bus stops. So you can see how some of this planning, this is actually Washington, D.C. I've been on, this is their metro system. I've been on quite a bit of this. So you see how public transportation is really intricate and different things you need to think about. But some things to think about public transportation, talks about population density. Population density is number of people per square mile. So if I look at a place like Washington, D.C., a square mile, if I walk a mile, then turn right, walk a mile, then turn right, walk a mile, then turn right, walk a mile, and make a square, and that would be a square mile. Washington, D.C., the population density, the people per square mile, is huge. You might be like 500 people per square mile. In Denver, on average, you might have 200 people per square mile. Here in Grand Junction, where I live, you might have 120 people per square mile. In little towns like Creed, where I used to live, you might have 50 people per square mile. So that's people per square mile is population density. As you think about this, the higher the population density, meaning the more people there are in a place, then the more affordable is public transportation. More affordable, more efficient, because you can move a lot more people will be going on those buses. For instance, if you had a bus system in the town of Nucla, where I used to live, where there were about 800 people, you might get 2 bus riders on every trip. Well, that would be a waste, wouldn't it? But buses in Denver and Los Angeles, places like that, they're always full. So that's how public transportation is much more efficient and effective when you have high population density. So in summary, we looked at green transportation planning, different types of public transportation, and planning for public transportation. Now last, you have the career connection, so you read about Priscilla, and I clicked her link, and her link the web page doesn't come up, so maybe something's happened with Priscilla's job, I don't know. But anyway, you can find out about her company, what Priscilla tries to do. So back to the write-up. So in lesson 2, we talked about green road building, and we talked about how public transportation is more affordable in densely populated areas. And then, of course, for numbers 7 through 10, we talked about Priscilla's job. So that's all the work for this week. That's the lesson for this week. And you have the study questions you'll do. You have the quiz, and of course, make sure and then you have the assignment make sure you look at the quiz preview before you do the quiz. So thanks everyone. I look forward to your work coming in, and we only have really 3 week 7, week 8, week 9. So you really need to get going on your work. Thanks everyone.